Hi. By now you have been assigned 3 readings, and I wanted to provide you with a short guide, or what I'm calling a shortcut to making sense of the readings. I've posted on Canvas 3 chapters from 3 different books on media ethics. One is Applying 4 Theories, another Intro to Moral Reasoning, and another Main Ethical Roads. I thought this would be a more efficient use of some of these books instead of having you be assigned 2 or 3 different books. I was taking just the basic ideas from several so you can read it in a number of different ways through a number of different lenses, and so maybe these ideas will start to make sense. Now, all of these readings cover several different philosophers, several different philosophical principles, but we're going to really narrow it down to just 3. And instead of referring to these approaches by the philosophers' names, I really want to look at them as approaches instead. And so we're going to be using virtue-based approach, a duty-based approach, and a consequence-based approach. Now, of course, these are associated with certain philosophers, and you'll get to know their names as well, but I want us to think more about the principles than about the philosophers themselves, because we're really cutting this down to some basics. We would want to get into much more of the philosopher's thinking if this were a social ethics course or something we were taking in the religion or philosophy department. Virtue-based ethics, we're going to associate those with the philosopher Aristotle. And this is really based on character. And how we're going to use it when talking about journalism is to refer to virtue as the golden mean. And what the golden mean is not necessarily the middle ground, but it's that balancing point between 2 extremes. If you're a journalist or photographer making an ethical decision about what story to use, who to interview, what pictures to use, you know that you're going to have something that's on the extreme, and maybe something that doesn't really address it all. So you really want to find that middle ground. And let me give you an example. You may remember this news story. It's from August 2015, and it took place in Roanoke, Virginia, when a former employee of a television station in cold blood shot and killed a young news reporter and her photographer. And this is how 3 different papers approached this in Virginia. And as you can see, the news leader used an actual photograph of the murderer as he was shooting the employees in cold blood. Obviously, the center one, the Virginia Pilot, has pictures of the victims in happier times doing what they loved, as the subheadline suggests. And then from the Roanoke Times, we have a picture of members of the community mourning the loss of the reporter and the photographer. And the headline really kind of summarizes it all, state of shock. So I suggest to you that probably the tragedy in real time is kind of that golden mean, because it does honor the victims by recognizing them as humans and as important people within the community. However, as you'll find out, ethics it's not mutually exclusive. And there's no real right or wrong. You can make arguments. You can make a good argument for the Roanoke Times photo as well. I just chose to use it for the Virginia Pilot. You certainly couldn't make an argument for the news leader using this Aristotelian approach. We're going to also talk about duty-based ethics, and these are ethics that are based on rules and kind of absolutes. This refers to a strict sense of what's right and what's wrong. And we're going to associate this with the philosopher of Kant. And so looking back on these front pages, using Kant and what's right and a sense of duty, you could probably make the case for both the Virginia Pilot as well as the Roanoke Times again. The whole idea behind duty ethics, too, is this notion of a categorical imperative, and this idea that you wouldn't make a rule or you wouldn't make a decision that you yourself would not follow. So this whole idea of what's right for one is right for all. Consequence-based approach. That's also referred to as utilitarianism. And you may have heard that posed as the greatest good and the least amount of harm for the greatest number of people. And that's associated with the philosophers Mill and Bentham. And if you think about a consequence-based approach, or just, focus on outcomes or ends, again, I think you could probably select either the Virginia Pilot or the Roanoke Times. You might select the Roanoke Times when you're thinking about minimizing harm, because it honors the victims by focusing on the mourners in the community rather than on the victims themselves, because that could be considered as doing harm to their family members and to their friends who are mourning right now. So you can make an argument, I'll say, first for the Roanoke Times and then maybe second for the Virginia Pilot. I don't think we could end our discussion without mentioning Machiavelli. His name will appear in several of the chapters you're going to be reading, and he is associated with pragmatic ethics, and you may know him as the author of the book, The Prince. And this whole idea that, we think about Machiavelli as being somewhat self-serving. And so within the context of journalism, it usually refers to the ends justify the means. And so we think about kind of sensationalistic covers, or journalists or networks that will go to the extreme to get the top advertising dollar, or to get the top story, or to get the highest ratings. So when we think about Machiavelli, we might think about finally that one front page of the image of the cold-blooded murderer just before he kills his victims. It's sensational, it's shocking, and it's bound to get readers. So just a quick summary. We'll focus on virtue ethics, we'll focus on duty ethics, and consequentialist ethics.